Learning styles. So I'm going to discuss two learning styles since we're talking about work from home, learning, teaching from home. It's extremely important to look at how learning takes place. And in a very simplistic way, on the left side, we have a simpler way, and it's a slightly more elaborate way on the right side. But on the left side, the simplest way a person learns is they're one of three types. They are essentially auditory learners, they're visual learners, or kinesthetic learners. So this we call VAC, which is the V for visual, A for auditory, and K for kinesthetic learner. So this is a model that has been used, and one of these methods work most effectively for a person. So a person is auditory dominant, a person is eye visually dominant, or a person is wants to be hands-on physically. So these are the three primary WAC methods. Of course, the task itself, the same person need not be the same for all tasks. It's a dominance of a particular way of being taught and of learning something. So this defines the kind of learner you are on almost every aspect of what you do, whether it is sports or studies or at work, uh, learning anything that you learn. You're primarily auditory dependent, visually dependent, or neither of them, which is physically you're dependent. You want to interact with things. So if you look at that, there are overlaps in that. So those who are visual auditory learners, the reading and writing aspect comes in. If you're a kinesthetic learner, then you're in the zone of music. And then if you're in the kinesthetic visual by overlap, then we're talking of spatial abilities. There are some people who have all three, and we have some aspect of all of this. Each of us has some aspect of all of this. But if you understand this, there are assessments. We have behavioral assessments within Klextra itself to determine what's your dominant factor, primary dominant factor, and depending on what your activity you're doing, it could differ. But it's very interesting from a self knowledge perspective that you understand what kind of learner you are. Now, also we can overlap some of these with slightly more complex systems like the Gardner's multiple intelligences, 8 intelligences, intrapersonal, interpersonal, mathematical. So we'll get into those. We have got into those in different videos elsewhere on the Klextra channel on YouTube. You could look for that. Here we're limiting ourselves just to these three learning styles on the WAC. Now, the same thing, if you look at Kolb's learning style, it's a slightly more evolved, developed method of how we look at it. So the same things, if you look at it, the concrete experience at the top is where people learn by feeling, whereas down at the bottom, abstract conceptualization, where people learn by thinking, and on the extreme to your left, active experimentation is doing. So people think, by doing, you learn by doing, whereas reflective observation on the extreme right is watching. So you would realize that these are four ways that in one of those four ways which dominate your senses. So you're either a feeling type of learner, a watching type of learner, a thinking type of learner, or a doing type of learner. Now, there are combinations of this. We get that. So it does evolve into other behavioral patterns of behavioral where you can bin everybody into one of these four quadrants, or if you subdivide them, then it becomes 16 quadrants. And you could approach the teaching methods will have to be appropriate for that activity, and the learners will also have to be. So if you have a teacher who's got 30 plus 32 students teaching 32 students, so you could theoretically say that if you divide this into those 8 boxes, for example, that each every four of your 32 students would learn in a very different way. So you might have to have different teaching aids and different methods to teach the same thing. So we don't have the time for that in a class or in an organized syllabus or curriculum. But if you really want the other person to understand and really learn what needs to be learned, then the teacher would also have to have those 8 kinds of approaches for the same point of view. So the topic that you're covering might have to have 8 different perspectives of the same thing. So even this, understanding this very fact of Kolb's learning styles could be done. Now you're listening to me and you're watching something, but it could also be done with a touch and feel, or we could do that with some Lego blocks. We could also have without any video, do not have a presentation, have a close your eyes and then listen to this audio. It's an auditory way of absorbing all of this. Visual is you cut out the voice, yeah, and the video that you're listening to, you can cut the video and do you understand what happens by just looking at the picture. So your dominant sense would have gathered this information primarily from auditory and visual in this presentation, but if you look at kinesthetic, it could have been, this whole concept could have been conveyed in a different way using any of the other senses. So we could of course use a taste method, we could use a touch method, you could bring in the other five senses, all the senses, five senses, in terms of communicating something. So the main aspect of that is, okay, there is a group of people or an individual who needs to learn something, but the teacher or the person uh, providing the content has to also think of the different aids and methods and approaches. Broadly, it has to be auditory, visual, or kinesthetic on the left as a WAC, or it has to be a little bit more organized, like one of the Kolb's learning styles. So hope this helps you with your work from home, teach from home, learn from home as you go forward.